Welcome to the Homelab Show, episode 126, Ubuntu 24.04. How you doing, Jay?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, man. The new Ubuntu release is out. I think you have some thoughts and comments on that. So we will,
Usually do.
yeah, you
A
got
few.
some opinions on it for
Yep.
sure. Because not everyone's thrilled with Ubuntu, and Jay's been even though you're the guy who wrote several books on Ubuntu, you're still very critical of their choices,
Yeah,
and so we're
nobody
gonna.
gets a free pass with me, even if it's revenue stream. If they make a mistake, I tell everybody about the mistake. It's just the way
Yeah,
it
well,
is.
and our goal is not to
Yep.
just complain about things. We actually want the companies to stop doing dumb or things that the audience doesn't want and their user base doesn't want. So that's always our goal here is to offer not criticism, but constructive criticism.
Yep.
And I think we could probably tell the audience because we talked about certificates last time and you mentioned it. And how are we doing on that new course you're working on? That's all coming up soon, right?
Yeah. I set the release technically for today at one point, but it's nearly there.
Okay.
So I think I just changed the verbiage on the site to around the first because it's out of like 23 or 24 videos. I'm at video 20 in the editing process and I'm moving pretty quick. So there's almost no possibility it'll last past this week. So it's most likely coming out this week still. I can't wait. I guess I'm just being very cautious because I just micromanage every little detail. And I'm a little bit of a perfectionist. It probably could have came out already, but that's just how I am. But it's for Linux Essentials. If everyone's hearing this for the first time, it'll be on Udemy. It'll be there, and yeah, I'll let everybody know when it's out, and there might even be some coupons available. Just keep your eye on my channel and the website because it's going to almost be like a shadow drop. As soon as it's done, I hit the button. It's just that simple, and I'll let everybody know as soon as it's out. But by the time we record again, it'll already be out. So I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah, it's a full course. So this is a lot
Yep.
of lot to tease
Oh yeah.
talking about. So it's been me and Jake from behind the scenes, we talk a lot, and it's been sucking up a lot of his time.
Well, this has been on my list for a couple of years, of list of things to do, but everything's just been so busy. But I'm in this place now where the studio is it's done enough to get busy. I mean, obviously, I could probably work on the studio for years to come, but it's functional and everything is in the right place, and it was time to finally sit down and do it. So I'm just really excited to finally have had the chance.
Yeah. One thing I'll start with before we jump into the Ubuntu is a couple of quick announcements. Is there is a new version of SureNAS, the Dragonfish 24.04, that's out and available. I did a video on that. I updated 5 production machines and did the testing before I did the video, so that way I could speak to it as not a day 1 but a day 5 release is what I did the video on it. There's also, and I haven't loaded this yet, it's on my after this to-do list, is going to be the setting up of the new XCPNG. They have some new features, new release features, which does include finally coming out with their new hyper-converged solution, XOSAN, XOStore. So that's all out as well. The release notes are all available on the blog post for both of these as well to dive into all the details. But, a couple of things that I talk about a lot on my channel. So I figured I'd mention them for people wondering, is it time to run some updates? And yes, it is.
It is. It is. It is. So
Any announcements, Jay? Or
no, I think I mean, that's the main one. The course is my main thing right now. So I'll be, I think I'm fairly back to normal with the schedule on the YouTube channel, especially considering the fact that I released 3 videos in one day at one point. So
yeah,
at least that's back to normal. So other than that, the course is pretty much it. So
perfect.
other news, we have Ubuntu that came
Oh,
out.
yeah, that came out.
So
That's why
that
we're
came
here.
out. And, I think a lot of people have seen my review and they know some of my thoughts already. But in this, so I guess what I'm going to do is expand on that a little bit. But I think Ubuntu server though is more of a match to our audience. So of course I need to talk about that. Not everybody cares about the desktop release. Some people are just running it on the servers. Some people aren't running it at all. Just want to know what I'm going to complain about when it comes to Ubuntu. So regardless of why you're listening or watching, there's different things we need to talk about here. So in no particular order, I'll just mention a few things. But the first thing I want to mention, because I know this is going to come up, there's going to be people asking, why am I not being offered this update? If I'm running the previous version of Ubuntu, why am I not being prompted? It comes up every single time, and you won't be prompted until 24.04.1. You will not get a prompt for update. It's just the way it's always been. So Ubuntu doesn't prompt you when .0 comes out. So basically, that's expected. You can force it if you want to update right now. There's a release page. I would give you the verbal instructions, but I don't want anyone to end up on the wrong release. So I want to make sure everyone's following the instructions. But if you want to update right now, you can. You just have to, do a few extra things. But when 24.04.1 comes out, you will receive a prompt that'll give you the option to update, and you can update at that point if that's what you want to do. Got to stay caffeinated when you're talking about Ubuntu. Excuse me.
Trying to say this release isn't exciting.
Yeah. Well, it's in a way it is and it's not, but it's exciting for the wrong reasons. But then Ubuntu is always exciting in a way because there's always controversy. But first of all, one thing to mention is that it's early days. So when we have an LTS release, which is what this is, which I guess I should have started with that, long-term support release, that's why everyone's talking about this Ubuntu release more than others, because every 2 years we have a new LTS release. This one is supported for 12 years, I believe, if you count the extended support. So we're gonna have this release for a very long time.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
so at one point it's less like, okay, what is it like right now, but more so what's it going to be like long term? Because when you have an LTS release, many distributions base on that. For example, Linux Mint will be based on it. Pop! OS will be based on it. A lot of the distributions that the community loves will be based on this. So this is going to be a part of the Linux community for a long time. So even though this is a brand new release and we're going to talk about what's new, it's more about how it is long term, and we can't really know that right now, considering it's not even been a full week yet, or it's been close to a week by now. So there's going to be a little bit we don't know. But the first thing to start with is Linux kernel 6.8, and there's some low latency features built in for people that need that kind of thing. I think low latency is something I probably should be into, being a content creator, but I've never really had a need to go to that level. I know some people use that for some of the audio things and compute related things. There's that. There's quick assist in the kernel, which I know a lot of people are excited about. That it's not something that I've used personally, but if as little as I know about it, my understanding is that quick assist was kind of hard to get working in some distributions, but being in Ubuntu is a big deal. Apparently, it Serve the Home reported on this, and it's one of the things that they were excited about for sure.
Yeah, the crypto acceleration stuff, it needs to be in the kernel so it can be more universally used. And
Mm-hmm.
it makes a huge difference. Where you hear about the most is going to be like firewall distributions. This is something that happens a lot in the FreeBSD space. Is Netgate is a big contributor to some of those crypto libraries that make a substantial difference in their performance. Because you look at the processor, if you're looking up like a passmark version of the CPU, you're like, oh, this thing couldn't possibly do anything. They're like, oh, it can route at 3 gigs per second encrypted because it's got this crypto accelerator chip that it takes advantage of. So they can certainly, in the right conditions, be a big speed boost. And of course, the right conditions are we're encrypting more and more things for privacy reasons, which is a good thing, but that comes at the cost of CPU cycles, which having that in there, I think we'll start seeing more things and easier use of encryption. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, and there's definitely some improvements here. And one thing that I need to give Ubuntu a lot of credit for is overall they're taking something that already exists and they make it better. Now you can argue that some people feel like they're making Debian worse. I probably feel that they are in a way, but taking personal opinion out of it and just sticking to the facts here, they take Debian and they do round some of the edges. One of the examples of this is the kernel that we're just talking about. There's new features in this kernel that I think Ubuntu users will find beneficial. And I guess I'm not 100% sure if any of these features are just, in Debian upstream and then Ubuntu is bragging about it, because sometimes you never really know if it's, I mean, you could tell if it's upstream, but who's going to go through every single item on the list and find out what's in Debian? Or, I mean, I probably could do that, but I'm also creating a course right now. But the idea though is, regardless of where these features came from, Ubuntu is adding additional things that Debian doesn't. For example, they've added in a previous release improvements to GNOME that makes GNOME run faster on Ubuntu. That's not new this time around. That was in a previous release. My understanding is that Debian 12 had pulled that in. So even though GNOME didn't pull the improvements in, Ubuntu put it in theirs. And this is one of the things that went the other way. Now Debian benefits from something that Ubuntu brought to the table. So there is this relationship, especially when you take controversy out of it. But another thing that I think Ubuntu really helps out with is hardware support, because even though Debian has great hardware support now, Ubuntu is still better because they have hardware enablement releases where other distributions, you can always upgrade the kernel. It's not that easy to do. Debian has Debian backports, can be kind of hit or miss. Ubuntu brings a solid driver and kernel update stack to the table a couple of releases into an LTS to make sure that there's hardware support, which all of this you could do in Debian, but Ubuntu kind of just makes it easier as part of their overall package. So there is this benefit you get by running Ubuntu, and that's the same here. I mean, for example, you have a new installer. We'll talk about that. ZFS is in the installer. That's not new, but it's noteworthy all the same. So they're adding these features to it, which is always a benefit. And with this release, the installer, I guess we could talk about the installer because that's something that people will have to do if they want to use it. The server and desktop versions use the same installer now. So there's this unified installer, and it's not going to look the same. If you're running Ubuntu server, there'll be a text version of it. If you're running Ubuntu on the desktop, there's a graphical installer, but it's still the same installer. And with that, it comes new possibilities for automation. So there's I forgot the file name, but a YAML file you can give it. You give the installer that'll automate the installation process. Again, not something that you couldn't do before. Every distribution has a way of doing this. Kickstart comes to mind immediately, but it's still a cool thing that Ubuntu is working on to try to make deploying server and desktop use the same underlying architecture, and I think that's a win. But that's something that's more for, I think, enterprise, because Homelab people are probably more likely just to use a Proxmox template and call it a day, but there's still beneficial features. Yeah.
Two and a half admins episode 192 did a great deep dive on the Ubuntu installer, ZFS, and how the Ubuntu community kind of built it with not the way they should have, but there's a better way to build it. And they kind of dive into that as a topic, which I found really interesting. Essentially, for reasons that can't be explained other than that's the way Ubuntu behaves, they don't participate a lot in some of the ZFS community, despite being once in a while showing up there, and they have helped. One of the 2.5 admins, actually two of them, are big developers of ZFS, and so they talk about the nuance of the way it's developed in Ubuntu. And there's also a Phoronix article they link to and breaks things down if those of you that want to fiddle with it, because there's actually different ways you could install ZFS, and there's a better way than the way Ubuntu did it. It's kind of weird. Ubuntu made a couple weird choices on their choice. They're like, yeah, these flags exist that they chose not to use, but you can use them. Here's how you modify it, and here's how you can have a better experience. I thought it was a great episode talking about that as the resident ZFS developers that they are over on 2.5 admins.
Yep, absolutely. And when it comes to server, I mean, ultimately there's going to be performance improvements.
Yeah.
And it's kind of hard to talk about performance improvements in a podcast because it's not like I can show it to you, but either you're going to notice it's running faster or it's not. But altogether, I think the server experience isn't going to be that different. I mean, ZFS is still considered experimental. It makes me wonder if it's ever not going to be at this point. This is what, the third LTS, at least the second. I don't even remember at this point, but it had this experimental label for so long now that it's interesting to me that I still don't understand. And when is this going to end, and when are we going to move to ZFS? I don't know. I mean, as far as moving to ZFS, I'm sure we're all using it, but I say move to ZFS. I mean, is that ever going to be a default option in the Linux distribution? I don't know if that's ever going to happen, but Ubuntu has it in their installer, so there's apparently an end game here, and I'm glad that it's there. So I'm, kind of seeming critical of this. It's just I don't, with the enterprise, you really want something to be stable and long term, and something experimental just seems more like an interim release kind of thing, even though I think it's a great thing that it's here for those people that do want to go that direction.
Yeah, and one of the things is for people wondering if you have to have multiple drives for ZFS to make it useful, all those other fun ZFS functions like snapshotting does not require multiple drives. So a lot of the base functionality, even if you're installing this on your laptop, is still there. One of the things you consider is like ZFS send, which is the ability to clone. Picture being able to have a really easy way to not only snapshot certain points in time before you do updates or make changes, but also being able to use the ZFS cloning, the ZFS replication features to say, you know what, I want to send a complete image of my system, my laptop to my
Mhm.
TrueNAS. And then if you ever go, you know, I want it back to that state, and I don't have enough storage to have all the snapshots, but I have them over on my NAS. Let me reverse that, just bring it back over. That would be an ideal situation. Like not messing with any third-party software, using the native block level ZFS replication. There's the dream Tom has for where I'd like to see this go. Like that's the future I want to see. Take that beta tag off, integrate those features, and embrace the ZFS file system.
Yeah,
I'll
it's
get off
either
my
embrace
ZFS
it or
soapbox.
don't, right? It's either embrace it or don't. It's either,
Yeah.
be all in or not. But, I think, and I think it's okay to talk about it at this stage of the podcast because I feel like Ubuntu is spread too thin. And they're reinventing things that they shouldn't be reinventing. And I feel like it's preventing innovation. It's getting into the stability of the distribution. I think the project is just spread too thin and is just going in too many different directions. So the installer, I could give a free pass because you have to update that every now and then. Sure, you could argue that the previous installer works just fine, but at what point do you argue that it's time for, upgrading that? And with as long as we've had the previous installer, it's hard to make a argument that against updating it. It needed to happen, so we can give them a free pass there. But then when you have the Ubuntu soft or Ubuntu App Center, as they're calling it, it's just so unnecessary. We have GNOME software. Why does this need to exist? It makes no sense whatsoever. Like, let's just take this thing, let's just get a GNOME distribution for the desktop version and include a clone of GNOME software on a GNOME distribution that does the same thing as GNOME software, but does it a little bit differently. And let's have all of our development people reinvent this for what? Just to make snap packages install better. And the thing about snap packages is that it's a Linux community thing. You know, the Linux community has decided that snap packages will not be successful. In my opinion, there's a 0% chance snap packages will be successful. Now, don't get me wrong, I want them to be successful. I don't want people developing anything for nothing. And it's a great technology. I mean, it really is. But regardless of how good it is, um, there's just this stigma around it now that I feel like this stigma, regardless of the technology, is going to kill it anyway. So at this point, I feel like Ubuntu is going to double down on Flatpak eventually. Obviously, they would probably deny that if they heard me saying that right now, but this is episode 126 where Jay says that Ubuntu will eventually go back to Flatpak, or not back to, but move to Flatpak because they'll ultimately decide it's too much work to reinvent the wheel and maybe even GNOME software. So it's episode 126 if you want to, quote me on this. But the
This is
reality
typical for
right
them.
what's
But this
that?
is I want to bring up, this is typical for them.
Yeah.
Case in point, Unity.
Yeah, I was going there. See, you
Yeah,
know
oh, see,
exactly where
I
I'm
read your
going.
mind.
That's
Sorry, I
you
went
know,
ahead a
yeah.
little you there.
Oh, no worries. I'm glad you did because great minds think alike. I mean, that's exactly what that's kind of where my issue with Ubuntu is that they say one thing and then something else happens where they stop development on Unity. And there's two sides to this. Some people really loved Unity. Some people really hate it. But either way, it was a big change. And they said that they wanted to focus on delivering software the way the original developers intended it to be released. And I have quoted Mark as saying this just for them to release GNOME that's completely changed, completely different, with a completely different app center. They go against flat packs and they completely redevelop their own thing again. And as you're saying, they stopped developing Unity because they felt like they're spread too thin. And here they are again doing the exact same thing. And it's only a matter of time before the history repeats itself. And then they're like, look, we need to kind of cut some projects here, regardless of how they feel about snap packages right now. Everybody in the company right now might be of the opinion that Jay is wrong. We are not going to get rid of snap packages. we are going to double down on it and we will never go to Flatpak. And they probably all believe that. But at some point, when the company people look at the numbers and the metrics and they decide that the only way the company can go forward is to cut projects that aren't, generating revenue, I guarantee you Snap packages will be among the first to go. If it's
Yeah.
not a financial thing, it's the stigma thing, it's a reputation thing. And even if the distribution gets bought out by another company, they probably don't want that reputation to come along with them. So I do kind of feel like we're in this situation where it's a good distribution, but the quality suffers because when I do the desktop review, I can barely get it installed. It's crashing when I change the resolution, and it took me 3 tries to set the resolution to record, like 3 tries. And some people could be critical when I judge a distribution harshly, but here we have an Intel system, no NVIDIA. Okay, a very common ThinkPad X1 Carbon that is Linux friendly, works with every distribution that I put on it. Every single one works fine. Fedora, same week, perfect. But Ubuntu, same kernel, same version of GNOME, same hardware, it doesn't work well. There's just no other way to look at this. There just isn't. If I feel like if they weren't so focused on reinventing things, they would have more time to kind of really double down on this. And then you have the issue where they release every 6 months or else. Meanwhile, Debian releases when they're ready. Fedora isn't afraid to, delay their release if they have to. But because Canonical doesn't want to upset anyone, they want to make sure they put the release out as soon as they can. But given all of that, quality issues aside, we do have the latest GNOME desktop. For a lot of people, that's a big thing. They want the new GNOME desktop. I don't blame them. A lot of people are looking forward to Pop! OS because that might and probably will be a better experience for all we know. But then again, it's less about how it is right now because Ubuntu 24.04 isn't going to be offered to you until point 1 comes out anyway. So technically, you could argue that these are all early day problems. But my opinion is when somebody packages something up and says it's ready for public consumption, then it's ready for public opinion all the same. And then when I get this release, I'm like, yeah, I'm sticking to Debian, honestly. Like it's just Debian and Ubuntu are so similar anyway that switching between one or the other isn't even that hard to do. So it's just kind of hard to recommend the distribution at this point to companies when we already have this commercial Linux strife right now with enterprise Linux. You have all this drama with CentOS, Red Hat. We've covered it before, and we just don't have any room for that right now. And people are getting kind of fatigued by all this, I think, at this point. We just want Linux to work, and we just want it to be stable. I don't think that's too much to ask for, especially with an LTS release.
I I will admit one thing they did decide to do in there, which was a security feature, is the removal of the dependency of the XZ-utils back, which of
Oh,
course was recently famous because of the backdoor found in it or
right.
potential backdoor that was in the upstream. Nonetheless, that has now been decoupled. So that is some promising engineering to remove the backdoor in Ubuntu that does not depend anymore on libsystemd. And what happened is for the too long didn't read, if you didn't see all the hubbub about that, the reason a utility was attached to it, a compression utility was attached to SSH, it was a clever backdoor because of the obscurity of why are those two things related. It's because that's how systemd attached the two things. So they did re-engineer that, so going forward they still using systemd, but they don't need to couple it with that XZ-utils anymore. Obviously, there's the concerns
So
that have been removed from that particular utility, but it's nice that they care about the some of the security features as well.
And recently in the news, systemd was in the news for wanting to come out with their own version of sudo, and they might have wanted to wait to release that news, considering the whole XZ link to SSH thing might not have been the best time to say they want to get into security.
Yeah,
Obviously, I'm being a little snarky. It's fine. They're going to develop what they develop, and I like systemd. I'm being critical of it, but I'm not actually one of the people that hate it. But it's just one of those
I
things.
don't either, which probably is weird to people. I don't know. People, I mean, I will certainly enjoy and embark upon jokes about it. I
The
will.
way I look at it, the thought process is always that, have one thing that does what it does well, or have one thing that does a bunch of different things. But the way I look at it, a million lines of code in one utility, and a million, excuse me, I can't talk today, a million lines of code in separate utilities, it's still a million lines of code. It's not really any different. I don't really care how it's segregated. At the end of the day, nobody's probably auditing it anyway, as they should be, because open source doesn't mean everyone is auditing it. It means someone can audit it. But that's another story altogether. But I guess it is related because systemd is used by Ubuntu and Debian. But I do want to focus on the good too, because it's easy to be critical, but at the same time, um, Ubuntu is putting some really good improvements into GNOME that Debian is benefiting from. So even if you don't like Ubuntu and you use Debian 12, for example, and if you happen to use the GNOME version, you are benefiting from Ubuntu's alterations to that and their upstream fixes, whether you use it or not. So we obviously thank Ubuntu for that. And then they give us the hardware enablement stack, which is going to improve hardware support over time, with hardware support being a problem with Linux for a while. Hardware support, that's a good thing for them to do, and that makes it easier for newcomers that need an easier time. So there's definitely a lot of good things with Ubuntu, but what I would like to see the project do is just kind of like embrace the technologies that exist instead of rolling their own, because that's what got them in trouble with Unity in the first place. And with history repeating itself and the quality issues I ran into, it might work. It might work really well for you, but it's just really hard for me to recommend it based on my personal experience, because at least with the desktop version, there's no excuse for a distribution to not run on hardware that all other distributions run on, especially the same software and kernel versions. And it's not even an NVIDIA issue at this point. So it's just really weird to run into that much trouble with an LTS release. The previous one, I think I ran into some trouble too, but it wasn't about that. It was the fact that the GNOME experience was Franken GNOME, because you had mismatched GNOME versions. At least this time you get all the same consistent GNOME versions in a proper GNOME release. So if you're one of those people that were put off by the previous LTS GNOME release, you might really like this one, because it's going to be more of a pure GNOME experience, even though that's kind of a hard thing to say with Ubuntu. But it's going to be more consistent, I should say. Fedora will give you the more, vanilla GNOME experience as usual. They came out the same week. If you want a more tailored experience, there's Ubuntu. Ubuntu is going to be supported for a lot longer. So if you're okay with these few issues right now in exchange for sticking to the same operating system for a long time, then obviously 12 years is really hard to not take into consideration here.
Yeah. Part of me just being snarky here, rolling back, remember when Ubuntu had the idea we were going to stick ads in the system? So when you looked up
Right.
calculator, it would then show you an Amazon calculator. And then I read
Or
Microsoft.
when you're looking up Jockey, which is the name of the driver application as it used to be called. You open Jockey if you want to install NVIDIA. Obviously, it wouldn't show Jockey on the name because it's something like driver installer. I can't remember what they called it back then. But I knew the command line version, you just type Jockey. I think it was a UI option. But anyway, you type it in the dash and then you find Jockstrap ads from Amazon. And I'm thinking, I'm just trying to install NVIDIA. I'm not trying to buy underwear. And that was the big face palm. So I can understand that's a little hard to look
Well,
past, but
Microsoft is,
yeah,
maybe the Ubuntu was just ahead of their
yeah.
time because Microsoft now wants to put ads in Windows 11. So they're going, wait a minute, that was a good idea from the Linux world. We used to a lot like Linux, but that whole ad thing, that seems like a great idea.
Well, we
Um,
do need to acknowledge what, investors, company people, and executives think is a win, and what we think is a win is we don't really have the same needs. I'm just going to say that we don't have the same needs there. But it's funny because you bring that up, and I'm glad you did, because reputation is hard to lose. It was a long time ago that Ubuntu
Years.
stopped doing this. I think it was over a decade ago, I think, maybe longer, but I'm not even sure. Don't quote me on the number of years here, but they stopped doing it. But everyone still accuses Ubuntu of doing the same thing still, because the Linux community has a hard time forgetting, which is exactly why snap packages won't succeed, because even if the technology is the greatest thing on earth, you call it a snap package and people have written it off. And I'm not saying it's a good thing. I think we kind of do need to give things another chance at some point. But the Linux community being what it is, it's once bitten, twice shy. And the 1.0 or whatever they called it just had some issues that made people nervous.
That would
And as
be
a
12 years
result,
ago.
12 years ago, and people are
So bad.
still complaining about it to this day, and they're not doing it anymore. So that's all you need to know how snap packages are going to do, because it's the same community. So that's how Ubuntu fared with that, and they're still not living it down to this day. So you could tell that, I just think history is repeating itself again. I really hope to see Ubuntu just double down and just, be the GNOME release it used to be, or the server release it used to be. And it's almost like they're just too busy trying to get bought out to really care. But that's, of course, I've been joking that they're going to get bought out by Microsoft for years, and it still hasn't happened yet. So
Yeah, I think Microsoft's moved on from that. They're like, we don't need it. Like we still have a pretty good product lock-in that we have, and pushing everybody cloud services. So, and they're busy.
yeah.
If it was called Ubuntu AI, they would have bought it already.
Well, I just think it just means that as soon as they want to own the number one platform on their own cloud platform, that might be a reason enough just to slap their name on the thing that's number one in Azure,
Yeah,
or whatever they're calling it these days anyway. So fun times.
fun times. I think
But yeah, even though, I mean, yeah, I was very critical of it, but I think also I've been using it for a very long time. I've been using Ubuntu since the very first release, and there's been releases in the past I've been critical of, and Ubuntu has bounced back afterwards. So, and who knows, maybe I'll revisit all this at when 24.04.1 comes out. I think that might be kind of fun to kind of look back and just see how the project is at that point. I believe that'll be this August, so maybe that'll be a time to kind of look back at this.
yeah. See what they've done. What's your feeling on how long it'll take before Pop OS has a version out?
I
I know they
don't
generally kind of
know
lag
off the
behind.
top of my yeah, I don't know off the top of my head right now. I know that people are using the beta, the new desktop, or I don't know if it's called the beta right now. So it's on my radar, but with the course, it's really hard to say. But I do think that, as far as I know, the new release is going to have the Cosmic Desktop. But I have heard that a preview is coming too. So it'd be kind of neat to. I know some people are compiling it, and they've been compiling it. The reason I haven't covered it is because I want the project to, bless a release that's close to being final to do
Yeah,
a preview. I don't want to, a year ago, right? What would that video be worth now? Sure, you're getting a sneak peek, but it's possible all those features are the way it looked back then. It might not even be how it is today. So I think it's getting close to time to give it an official look on the channel, because I think it's probably to a point where they're unlikely to make any massive changes at this
yeah.
point. So
That's what I was thinking
can't
about
wait.
looking at it too, because I've got to upgrade my computer. Well, I don't have to, but I have an opportunity to upgrade my computer. And I realized this one's 5 years old. I'm like, okay, that's a good life cycle. It still renders fast, but let's time to swap some parts, maybe load a new operating system on it. But I still want to stay with Pop OS because it works.
Or
So
just install Pop! OS on a flash drive, treating the flash drive as a hard drive, and then you have a portable install, and you can just boot
yeah,
into it every now and then, and when you feel it's stable enough, then just go ahead and install it. Just keep it
yep,
updated off the flash drive, and it's kinda one way to kinda gauge the stability of something, is just, and I don't mean, like, run the ISO off the flash drive. I mean, run the
yeah,
ISO off of a flash drive, get
install.
another flash drive, put it in your computer, and tell the installer that the flash drive is your actual hard drive. Completely different experience. It's still not gonna be as fast as a metal, on the metal install, but it will boot from the hard drive. It will retain updates. You'll be able to have your documents and everything, and you have your portable testing system. It's
Yeah,
one of those things that not everyone knows you could do that. So there you go, pro tip.
yep. There's a pro tip. All right, is that all we have for this latest update?
I think so. I think I complained enough.
We done complaining about this update.
Yeah.
Well, nonetheless, check out Jay's channel, learnlinux.tv, where you can learn all things Linux, and look for that drop coming within maybe by the time you're listening to this, because Jay's on the cusp of having that new course released and everything
Yep.
else. So that's go to learnlinux.tv for that. Subscribe to the channel, all that fun stuff, man, where you can dive deeper into all the Linux stuff. Your videos have been great. I know a few of the people at work, I think, are watching them too to pick up on a few Linux commands. So that's kind of cool.
Nice. I'm glad.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.